Welcome. So we learned some basics on React.js. So we are building a single page application. So far what we have seen, how we can create a components and with the help of props and state, and we can add much interactivity, dynamicity to the given application. So I'm going to make a CRUD application, create, retrieve, update, delete application. So of course we'll put the objects and arrays into use. So we'll do a couple of things. So I'm going to create a new project. I'll put the source code in repository so you can uh, keep them for your learning purpose. So I'm just going to close this project with this and going to the command line. So let's stop it. Go back, create a new project. So we were using npm init to create a new project. We can also use npx, which is a node package executor, something which is something the same thing what it really did with the keyword npm init. So I'm just trying the other way, or one more way we can. So we can use npx and the command create React app. See, if I'm using init, I won't use the create keyword. So just I'll go ahead with npm init React app, and finally the name of the app. So CRUD, create, try, update, delete kind of word. So let me create a project. Before it proceed, maybe let it go on. I'm going to use this time um, Bootstrap for the CSS purpose. So I'm going to use this Bootstrap, uh, the CSS and JavaScript library to add a little bit like uh, beautification to our application. So those who'd like to get, I'm not going to touch the detailed part of Bootstrap or something. I'm going to use its capabilities on creating rows and columns, maybe the nice looking buttons, and that way. So okay, whatever the class name I may use would be very basic of this Bootstrap. But if you really want to see detailed information on Bootstrap, how to put the components into use, you can refer the official website. There are all the components, the buttons and card, forms, everything available. So I'm going to use this CSS in order to have a nice looking to our application what we are developing. And of course there is an installation instruction is also there. Bootstrap can also be added through CDN. And of course, in order to make Bootstrap to work, it requires a couple of additional JavaScripts, Popper, jQuery, all sort of things. So we'll see how we can integrate it with our React.js project as well. Okay, hopefully it is done now. Yes. So now we have a new project created. Let me move to the project folder and also open the project into inside the Visual Studio Code. So let me open there. Okay, so now we have a new project created. Of course, the same procedures, and okay. So here, if you look at this, so it has its own CSS, so which is there as a index.css. This is something being written. So you can normally write a CSS and of course integrate it in our project in this way. You see that the import, the path of the file has been given. Now we are going to add the Bootstrap dependencies. So now inside the project folder, install Bootstrap with the keyword command npm install Bootstrap, and of course it's going to require jQuery, and also it's going to require popper. Let me see that. What's that? Popper JS. This is for adding models, I hope so. And also make sure the entry is added to a package JSON file, so that the next time we don't need to separately. Even if you are committing to the repository, all you need to run npm install, so the dependencies will be directly added. Okay, npm install. I'm adding Bootstrap, jQuery, popper.js, and of course save. So it's going to download all the required dependencies in order to have it integrated within our project. While it does something, and let's go to our Bootstrap website. Of course, this way, because I would like to use a couple of built-in components. So in Bootstrap, so a button. So especially we are going to use buttons. So in order to create a button, the class name is btn and btn primary. The primary is this color, and secondary. There are various colored buttons are available. We will be extensively using this kind of buttons, and of course the forms. Yes, of course we are going to create some form here. So the nicely looking forms usually is grouped within the class form group, and the input fields are going to have the class name form control. So this one we will be using it. So a couple of course some other sized form input field elements also available, and maybe one I would like to, in the layout section, so because the very purpose we use Bootstrap is to keep the layouts neat and clean. Usually Bootstrap layouts would be created within the div tag having a class container. So whatever we write or subsequent div tags we are going to create, we will be creating within the container element. And of course the responsive, for example, it has the page loaded in mobile or tablet or in laptop or a bigger screen. The subsequent adjustment will be done by Bootstrap, and it has the responsive capability. And one more thing I would like to use is the grid system of, I'm pretty much a fan of the grid system what Bootstrap gives, and of course lots of responsive modern CSS framework. That's where it's pretty much useful in creating a responsive design. So a grid system. I'll be using rows and columns. So I'll be using the columns of something like small, medium, large. So with the keyword SMMD kind of thing. So it's a number of 12 columns in a row possible. So we can create a desired size of a column in this way. So we'll be we'll be using this Bootstrap column technique, row and column technique. So I'll be using it quite a bit. So I want you to spend a little time on it. If you are very new to Bootstrap, it's very easy. We'll start using them in our projects. Yes, I think we got all the dependencies added. So Bootstrap, Popper, jQuery, all those things added. So how we can verify it? So let's go here. This is our project. If you notice the package.json file, we see that our dependencies got added. Now not only React, and it also has 3 dependencies. Now we need to add it to our project. Let's go here. So let's import it. Okay, so it's there in the Bootstrap folder. So it will be directly referring the node modules, and within the distribution folder, CSS. Okay, how do I pick this path. It's pretty simple because since I opened this, let me open one more time. Yeah, Bootstrap. So there is a dist folder. So it looks like distribution CSS folder. And finally, there are plenty of files are there. I'm pretty much interested on only one CSS. Maybe a mini file also we can put in use. Bootstrap.css. Okay, this is a file. And also I require one more file. Bootstrap JavaScript. Within the dist folder, there is a JavaScript. Okay. There is a bootstrap.js file. We add both the dependencies. Okay, let's see. Okay, we have to start the server. So npm start. So this project we added bootstrap dependencies for our CSS purpose. Now the pages are going to look a little bit better rather than we just used a lame design because we really didn't care about the CSS. We just only focusing on components of what React does and how the components behave. Now we are going to have a neatly organized one. Okay. Now let's close this modules. I'm not going to open it further, so I have the dependencies. Let's come back to our old business. Let's start writing everything from the scratch. Import. Okay. So we are using a class-based so export default. And of course, we need to have a render function with the return statement so that the view could be prepared. Okay. First, we'll make sure the Bootstrap works perfect or not. So let's create a simple button. As we see in Bootstrap, I let the error to come up. So how the button should look like. I'm going to create this button. So first thing, the button is going to have a class name having this value. So in JSX, the class, instead of plain class, it is going to be class name. So the value can be a hard-coded string, or it could be a value coming from a JavaScript object. So in this case, it's a hard-coded one. So the btn primary. Okay. So let's see how. Yeah, Okay. Anyway, the button rendered properly, and it is having bootstrap skin. So the CSS is applied. So we have a bootstrap ready for us. Fine. So let's create something. I'm going to create an application with a form. So which is going to have add edit capability. First, let's make a form, and below to that form we'll have a table. So let's see how we can put it into use. Bootstrap, as I was talking about, everything will be contained within the class called container. Here the class I'm referring is CSS class. Container. So everything wrapped within the container, I'm not going to have any navigation bar to say, just a plain design I'm trying to keep. Okay, so also I'm going to keep a row, underlying row. We can create columns. Say columns, usually 12 columns for various proposition we can use. So let's say the medium sized column having 3 proportion of grid. So totally 12. So I think so each block, each columns will be equivalently spaced between, and there are also 4 maximum columns possible in a row, because see, as we counted, everything will come within 12. So 3, 3, 3, 3, 12. So here I would like to make few things. Okay, let it be. I would like to keep the center one having the 6 proportion of it, so that again, so this part I can keep it to the center. The other part will become a kind of offset, so that left and right I have a empty space given for me. Okay, I think there is no view to see now, but however, we'll keep the web inspector open, and we can also track. See that the within the root tag everything has got loaded. So we do notice, see the empty space and the sizing have been given. The center space is having longer width. Okay, let's keep something here. Then keep a form. Okay, let's keep the form with. Okay, let's we always play around with a student record, a kind of thing. So I'm going to keep group the forms in such a way. I'm using Bootstrap form group class. See that to create a block of the label and the input field. It has to be a form group. So the same thing I'm writing over here. Let's keep the label, name, input field, text. Since the form, its name attribution could be very important. And it's and the class, the Bootstrap form input field will be form control. You can probably, so being a form element, and of course you can probably end like this. The class name form control I'm using because this is a class it uses. So in order to prepare a view, so let's refresh and see how it is looking like. Yeah, we got a nicely looking form. Let's slightly add a few more things. So let's add a placeholder. Okay, we got a form now. Let me complete. So, say roll number. As we saw, it's like I just want to create a kind of object type. So I thought, okay, let's create a student record. So okay. I'll keep a minimal form. So our intention is to learn the components. So I'm just going to keep a little simple so that we can easily understand how the components can be put into use here. Okay. Yes, and finally the submit button. Class name being a button. Okay, let's keep a secondary. I think it's not looking so good. So let me get a nice looking form. Okay, success. So we'll use the keyword success. So it appears slightly bright. Yes, we got a form ready for us. Okay, and the form is not actually having any kind of declaration how the form is going to be submitted. By default, it would be submitted uh, like in the same page. So we'll have to do a couple of things. We need to declare the form submit is post. Okay, I think there is one way to overcome it. Instead of this post, I'm going to use a function. Okay, so we prefer to use a fat arrow system. So on student form submitted, just a name. So this will also carry an event because I'm going to call it in a function. It's available on submit. So of course it's a JavaScript object we are going to point. So the curly brace comes here. This submit. Okay. So now type something. Okay, there's a problem. The page refresh and the form entries being pretty much visible here. So to overcome this, I don't want to refresh the page. So what I can do, when the form is submitted, I can use the event argument to prevent default sequence of form submission. So it won't submit actually, but it will execute the function and it won't refresh the page, rather it will start executing the function statements. So since I keep it in this way, let's see what's the difference we can see. I really don't see the form refresh, page refresh happens because as soon as this function is called, whenever the submit happens, it will stop the default behavior of the form. So now we need to use our state and props to create the data or consolidate this data so that a table can be created. So a kind of simple, nicely looking form we have just created. Probably we may require the state to keep track of all these changes. Okay. So let's implement the constructor, because as we know, the props would be the argument of the React component, and which always will be in the constructor, and it requires to be superimposed, and then state. Okay. Now, what are the variables? The changing behavior. For example, these the values of what we type on input field will be changed as the user type. So that one has to be tracked. And one more thing, from whatever variable we values we get from the form needs to be stored in an array. So I'm going to need a couple of things. So there are three objects or three properties. It's going to be, I'll make it as a first name just because the name looks quite generic, looks like a reserved word. Last name. So there's no last name, it's a roll number. So and subject. Okay. And one more property also I would like to keep. That's actually going to keep the track of the records. So I'm going to keep students, which is going to be an array. Okay. Fine. And we need a lot of things to be done here. One is we need to track the changes happening on the form or input field, as we did in the previous example. And whenever the submit button gets clicked, we need to get all the values and add it to a array, and then display the array elements in a table. So that's exactly what I'm trying to create. So I'm going to need one more function on something. I'm started to write a relevant naming now. So this is going to keep track of changes happening to the text input field. So let's, okay, we'll do the old technique like we did before. Let me make it a bigger one. Okay. So this is the place. First thing, the value, state first name, on change. This is the function it is going to call. Okay, I really have three different forms, input fields. So do I need to write a three different function for it? Maybe it will be looking very bad. I'll do one thing. I'm going to keep the same thing. Probably I'll keep a if or switch case statement within that. So I'm going to write this roll number. And finally, the subject. Okay. Let's get event target. Instead of value, if we get a name, we can get the input, the field name, the attribute, whatever we give a name. This particular value can be captured. So we can put a if statement or a switch case statement to differentiate from where it is coming in. Okay, so I prefer to use switch case statement. So syntax is pretty simple, switch case and break blocks. So the key in this case, field name in the case is going to be, so these are all the name, number, and then finally the subject. Let's format so that things look better. So whenever the text input value changes, the underlying form name would be, the input field name would be identified, and the corresponding state can be updated. So this set state, setting the state is it's a function. Actually, it requires a object which is having the property. So in this case, the first name means first name property with a new value. So it's even target value. Okay. And similarly, this is for roll number. This is for subject. So this one will keep track of the changes happening to the input fields. Uh, okay, at the end, we really want to see what is the state value. We can also put a console log here. Okay, I don't want to disturb the console because it's whenever the typing is going to happen on input field is going to be called, so it might be looking very bad. So I'm going to keep it here. I'm going to output what is the state object having a value whenever the form is submitted. So let's type. So I'm going to type some number. When I click enter, we see that so the change is being tracked, and of course the state is having a new value. And of course I get to populate the students array, which is empty as of now. So when I type, when I change it, I see a different values are coming in. Okay, so it works as expected, but still I probably I could have done much better. But okay, we are starting slowly getting into it, so fine. So a form is created for us, and then the tricky part comes in, how we are going to display them. Okay, so in this Bootstrap based design, I have a row which is having 3 columns. So both the left and right columns are offset purpose, and there is a offset keyword also available class name. So we don't need to keep this empty class name. But as of now, I'm going to keep, or maybe in the other example, I'll use the offset class name. So I'm going to need one more row. See the nested part I identified. By clicking on it, I identify the start and end, and then I'm going to create one more row. And row ready. Okay, now we are going to have a table for us so that these values can be displayed. So I'm going to create a Bootstrap based table. Bootstrap based table, let's see the example. So yeah, here it is. So we need to declare the class name table. There are various color tables are there. I prefer the very basic one. I really don't want to have any complex design. The strip table, dark border table, and this is a very convention one, so we'll use this one. So I'm going to use table hyphen bordered. Okay. So the class, okay, and so row we need to have it wrapped within the column. Okay, let me keep this one as a bigger one, this longer one, so I'm going to keep it within this. So table hyphen border. Okay. And the table head, which is going to be with a subsequent table row, the table head, which is going to be a label, which is of course what are all the labels we have. So it's going to be th table head. So one is name, roll number, and subject. Let's see how it is looking. Yeah, we do see. Okay, I'll close this web inspector for some time so that we'll see the exact form. Okay, these are all the table. Okay, and I think there is no space between. I think I probably add a break or probably horizontal line so that slightly adds. Okay, so there is a gap between. So the form and underlying the table is going to be created. Okay, this table has to be dynamically changed because as the user type on a new entry and the array gets populated, the array has to be displayed over here. Okay, so let's see. So the table head is ready. So table body, which has to be ready. Okay, so this is a dynamic part. This one is based on the values getting inputted. Okay, now we have things being tracked with the help of state property, state object, and whenever form gets submitted, we are getting this particular function execute. Okay, now time to populate the students. Remember, this array is going to keep track of all the objects in a kind of a object form. So let's see how we can group it. This dot set state. Okay, then there are a couple of things coming into mind. One is creating a copy of an array, say local student. I know how to create a copy of an array, I already told you. So, because I was talking about by default the array is mutable. The mutable objects will not work properly on within the render because render is a function which keep track of object changes, because whenever object value changes with the help of state, it has to refresh itself or the part of the code. So the values or the object should always be new. If it is a object which is already existing, just because it has a mutable capability, the state might not be able to track the changes. So that's the reason I keep a new copy of an array, meaning a local copy. And in this, okay, I think we can directly add it. An entry. So again, that will be much better to add first name. And the subject. It means at the end of an existing array, add one more entry. So this is the object will get added at the end and a new array will be created. Okay, and then finally use this dot set state as a function which takes a object argument and tell the students object. Okay, both are same, so I'll slightly make it different so that not to get confused. Okay, the state will get updated. We'll also verify whether the values are being populated within the array or not. So just keep the console statement. The form ready. Let's see an output. Okay, I think the console is printing. Okay, the students array is still empty. Okay, got the reason. Reason is this setting the state value probably requires a little bit of time. So the state value changes. So we have to make sure this value set is completed. Then we can see what is the value of the given state. So the set state has one more argument, which is a function. See that the first argument being an object, JavaScript object, the second one being a function. Functions are objects in JavaScript, so I'm using a fat arrow function. Okay, the second argument gives the callback. I mean, it's a callback function. Whenever this set is completed, this is a block will get executed. I'm just going to keep this one here. So let's see, changes happen. I'm saying now if you notice that array is having an entry. Okay, so we'll keep a different entry. Let's clear it off. Now we have two entries and the value is updated. Okay, I think the state part we have completed. And we can also, once the state is populated or added to an array, we can empty the value of the other objects. So in this case, the first name, I'm going to empty it. Roll number, I'm going to empty. And subject. So what I really did is, so once I populated the entry, so I'll empty them, and of course the array will have the particular data added to it. Okay, so now the array is keeping track of all those things. Values are emptied and the value is being captured inside an array. Okay, absolutely fine. But how we are going to display the table? Okay, here it is. And this is where we are going to, I'm going to use an iteration part so that it displays that particular entry, the array entry. I'm going to use the JavaScript map can also be used. So this dot state of students and map. We've already seen that example. And so it's a map is nothing but it will go through each element of this array and apply a logic of a function what we supply here. So the function usually carries, so remember if you just closely notice, and it's a argument, it's a parenthesis, within that it's going to be a function. So It's going to have an argument. Maybe I'll do one thing. I'll create a function and display rows. It's going to carry two. One is the object, another the index. So this function will be applied on each elements of this array. So I'm going to, and of course there should be a return statement, because that's one, because through this one only the value is being applied. Okay, here I'm going to keep the table 4. Okay. I think one more label can also be added, which is called the serial number. Okay, so TD. I'm going to display index value, because indexes start with 0, so that's the reason. And the first one being within the object, the student's object is having following attributes, properties: first name, roll number, and the subject. So name, okay. So on each occurrence of the items of this particular array, this function will be applied, because we are using JavaScript Map, and this particular row will be, so for example, the very first entry, this particular item will be rendered once, and for the second, third, this particular rows will be repeated and will be displayed within this particular block of our application. Okay, let's see how it works. Okay, I think we got it, but there is still a kind of a warning popping up. Warning, each child in list should have a unique key property. Yes, actually, I was talking about. So the render function keeps track of the changes. Mean any object changes, the re-rendering has to happen so that that updated value display. So it expects a unique key to identify the changes happening to the uh, JSX elements. So I'm going to declare a key attribute, so that it knows the changes is happening. So let's see. Now see, there's no warning. I think the value is being populated. I'm just closing the inspector. See that the list is dynamically populated and the values are being added dynamically. We put use of the state object in order to dynamically update the value, and we also use couple of techniques to display. In this case I've used JavaScript Map, and that example I already talked about. So the JavaScript Map is nothing but it's a function. It will go through the elements of an array and apply the function on each elements, and of course it has two arguments. One is the instance of the element of an array, in this case an object, and the index. So this is a function and it's been applied and it has a return statement because the updated new array. You see, if you see that this JavaScript map also produce a new array. See that in most cases the render function requires a new object whenever change is going to happen within the JSX. So because it requires an immutable object, and going ahead we are also going to use Redux, React Redux, and we have to know the difference. The render usually keep track of the object changes. So it prefers a new object rather than a mutable object, because mutable object itself can expand and will have a lesser visibility for the render function to identify the object value changes. So it always expects a new object. So that's the reason we have used the JavaScript array map instead of a normal for loop iteration, because it requires a new array once the logic applied, a new object or array being created, and that would display this value. So this is pretty simple example. So in this example we learned how to integrate Bootstrap, and we also used the React.js state in order to track the object value changes, and also we know when the state changes, and it also carries the set state also carries a callback function to confirm the state change completion. And of course we also put use of JavaScript map here. Okay, it does the work. We need to expand it a little bit further, but if you notice, this code is getting quite bigger, and we are going to have a little bit of difficulty uh, in order to effectively use the space. So I'm going to split this into various components in subsequent examples, because I really don't want everything carried or contained within a single component. We probably split them, say like the add and edit form as a separate component. So this would be a separate component, the table would be a separate component. So we can separate them so that we'll make that particular application easily maintainable. Of course we can reuse them wherever required. So in the next subsequent example I'm going to add the edit and delete capabilities of this particular application. And of course let's see how we can put use of the props also into this, because when we are going to keep different components we will also need to use of make the use of the props object of the React component. Let's see them in the next example.